Well, thank you for joining us today. We're looking at the 7 I am statements that Jesus made in the Gospel of John. And we looked yesterday at the fact that he is the bread of life, or he is the light of the world. Today we're looking at his statement in John chapter 6, verse 35, that he is the bread of life. I'll start by reading that verse. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will not hunger, and he who believes in me will never thirst. Let's get some context here. So far, Jesus has been well received by the masses anyway, and he is doing some great signs and wonders that shows who he is. And one of those has been to feed a multitude of people. Just prior to this, he had fed 5,000 men. That apparently didn't include the women and children, so it could have been much more than that. But we have 5,000 people or more fed, and they're excited about that, and they want to actually make him king. And you can see why. Most of us have never actually experienced true hunger. We get hungry sometimes, but to have the idea of true hunger with the possibility of not finding food is something pretty foreign to most of us. But in the first century times that Jesus lived, hunger was a real deal at times. And someone who could come along and actually feed the people and meet their most basic need for food without cost, it was quite something very special. And so when they found a person in Jesus who now they're recognizing perhaps as a great prophet, if nothing else, and he feeds them in this way, on top of the other signs that he's performed, some of them now say, let's make him king. Maybe he's the Messiah. Let's force him to be our king, to take care of us and to feed us and satisfy our hunger. Jesus, of course, rejects that because their motivation is to be fed, not to follow him in righteousness. But Jesus does then, based upon this account, he says that I am the bread of life. And if you come to me, you'll never hunger. Now, he wasn't talking about physical food here, of course. He's talking about spiritual food. If you believe in me, you'll never thirst. So Jesus is promising to satisfy something far more important than our physical hunger and thirst, but to satisfy our spiritual longings and our great spiritual needs. We drop down to verse 48 to see some more of the context. So people understood this better than us. But he says in verse 48, I am the bread of life. So he repeats his statement. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness and they died. This is the bread which comes down out of heaven, so that the one may eat of it and not die. I am the bread, I am the living bread that comes down out of heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever, and the bread also which I give for the life of the world is my flesh. The people were well versed in the miracle of the manna that took place in the wilderness. And you recall that story. The Jews were in the wilderness for about 40 years. They had no means of feeding themselves. They would have died very quickly in the wilderness, but God fed them by giving them every morning, except on the Sabbath, manna, which was some kind of a cake-like substance, tastes a bit like honey, and it sustained them for decades as they were there in the wilderness. And so God fed them. God took care of them physically. He met the needs of their physical life. So Jesus is saying here, he's identifying with that. He's drawing a direct line to that. And he's saying basically, you remember what God did for the Jews in the wilderness? Well, I've come to give you the true bread of life, not just a physical bread that will satisfy your hunger for a day or two, but a spiritual bread, the spiritual manna of life that will satisfy you forever and will give you spiritual life. So Jesus has come to do that. So the picture is this in our passage is that the physical hunger that they had experienced would be a direct link to the spiritual hunger that they also experience. Everybody knows when they get hungry. All of us have eaten a big meal and thought we would not eat for days after that, but even a few hours later, we get hungry again, and we want to eat again. We want our hunger satisfied. So that's a natural biological function that God has built within us. But there is a spiritual hunger in us as well, and that's not always so easily recognized. We know it's there. We know there's an emptiness in our lives. We know there's something more beyond us. We know there's deep within us, according to Romans 1, that God exists. We know those things, and yet somehow we satisfy or try to satisfy all that hunger with a lot of spiritual junk food. It never satisfies, but we keep on trying over and over with these various things. The Jews have been doing it, and people have been doing it ever since. Well, Jesus is saying those things will never satisfy, but when you come to me, I'll give you the bread of life. And it's a bread that will satisfy the deepest heart longings within you, the deepest thirst within you, and it will satisfy you continuously and forever. So Jesus has come to offer us what nothing else can. He is the bread of life. I trust that'll give you a wonderful day in the Lord.